you might think is an unusual place, Mount Carmel, and the Old Testament prophet Elijah. Mount Carmel is not a single pointy mountain like you might be thinking, but rather a coastal mountain range in northern Israel, stretching from the Mediterranean Sea toward the southeast, coming down this way. And the highest point is 1,791 feet above sea level, and that's where the fun begins. That's the mountain right there. I realize that's not a very dramatic shot. Mount Carmel is interesting in Old Testament history because in mainstream Jewish, Christian, and Islamic thought, Elijah is indelibly associated with this mountain. That is a statue of Elijah the prophet. He was a prophet to Israel in the 9th century BCE, a dark and faithless period of Israelite history. Ahab was the king of the northern kingdom of Israel, and he led his people to worship Baal, the fertility god of the Canaanites, and he led his people away from the one true God of the patriarchs. So, let me remind you that when the kingdom split, God said God wasn't going to bless the northern tribe of Israel because they weren't worshiping at Jerusalem, the city of David. And so the northern kingdom of Israel was in constant turmoil. Anyway, here's a story that I think you will find amusing, and I'm going to read this from 1 Kings chapter 18. Ahab, the king of the northern kingdom, sent to all the Israelites and assembled the prophet at Mount Carmel. Elijah then came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping with two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, then follow him." The people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, even I only am left as a prophet of the Lord. But Baal prophets number 450. Let 2 bulls be given to us. Let them choose one bull for themselves, cut it into pieces, and lay it on wood, but put no fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. Then you call the name of your God, and I will call the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire is indeed God. A good test, wouldn't you say? All the people answered, "Well spoken." Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, Choose for yourselves one bull and prepare it first, for you are many. Then call on the name of your God, but put no fire to it. So they took the bull that was given to them, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, crying, "O Baal, answer us!" But there was no voice, no answer. They limped about the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, surely he is a god. Either he's meditating, or he's wandered away, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened." Then they cried aloud, and as was their custom, they cut themselves with swords and lances until the blood gushed out over them. A midday passed. They raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation, but there was no voice, no answer, and no response. Elijah said to all the people, "Come closer to me." And all the people came closer to him. First he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, remember that, according to the number of tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, "Israel shall be your name." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Then he made a trench around an altar, large enough to contain 2 measures of seed. Then he put the wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. He said, "Fill 4 jars with water, and pour it on the burnt offering on the wood." Then he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. And he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. Why did they do it 3 times?
Because 3 is a holy number.
Because 3 is a holy number. So the water ran all around the altar and filled the trench with water. At the time of the offering of oblation, the prophet Elijah came near and said to them, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me so that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have not turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and even licked up the water that was in the trench. Then all the people saw it. They fell on their faces and said, The Lord indeed is God. The Lord indeed is God. Elijah said to them, Seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape. Then they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the Wadi of Kishon and killed them there. The Lord our God is God. I stood at the top of this hill, which is the highest point on that long mountain range, and was awestruck by several things. One is the story that we read when we were on the top of the hill, in the presence of Elijah on that podium. There is a monastery up there now today. It's called Moraka, and that means the fire, the sacrifice, the fire. So tradition indicates the presence on Mount Carmel is a series of Jewish and then Christian hermits who lived there, prayed and taught in the caves used by Elijah and his successor Elisha. The first monastery on Mount Carmel was built in the 6th century CE. The Roman Catholic Order of the Carmelites was founded right there. And one of them, if not the only monastic orders, not to refer to a charismatic founder, but to a prophet of the Old Testament, Elijah and his disciple Elisha, are considered the Carmelites' spiritual fathers of the order. In 1868, a monastery called Moraka, the burning, possibly related to the burnt sacrifice, was built. Inside, it's a small place, and inside there is an altar. The monastery altar is made up of 12 stones, because 12 represents the number of tribes of Israel. The drive up to the monastery, 1,791 feet above sea level, cannot be made by large tour buses. So at the bottom of the mountain is a Druze village, and the men of the city operate a fleet of vans to take tourists up to the top. The treacherous, steep, narrow road, complete with hairpin turns and unguardrailed cliffs and switchbacks, is a frightening and complicated trip, made more complicated by the other vans coming down from the other direction. Anyway, quite an exciting trip. So what's a Druze, you're going to ask? Druze are ethnically Arab and Arabic speaking. Their monotheistic religion incorporates many beliefs from Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, and is also influenced by Greek philosophy and Hinduism. Druze have not proselytized, that means they don't evangelize, and haven't since the 11th century, and the community remains closed to outsiders. Okay, this first slide here is looking to the northeast to the Kishon River Valley, which is right here on the tree line. Oh, I'm sorry, it's right there. You can see the river right there. The next picture is southeast to the Jezreel Valley, and back here, do you see these two lines? You can see that, right?
Yep.
Okay, that is Ramat David Air Force Base. And while we were up there, jets were flying around. Now, do you remember what the dimensions of Israel were that I told you last week? The widest part is
293.
what?
293.
290 miles is the length.
85.
Like somebody said 80 something? 85, that's right. Oh, you're good. 85 miles is the widest. 290 miles is the longest. Anybody know how fast an F-16 flies?
Fast.
Really?
1,300 miles an hour. So it's like NASCAR there. Left turn, left turn, left turn, left turn. You can get anywhere in the country in a matter of minutes. They constantly have planes in the air because if Syria or Lebanon or Egypt attack, there is no immediate response because the whole country is that small. And finally, okay, whoops. This is southwest and the Mediterranean you can see in the distance over there, right back there. Look how lush and green it is, because you won't see that down south of Jerusalem. Okay, you may think Herod the Great is another unusual historical figure to discuss, but Herod is an interesting and important figure in the history of Israel and plays a minor role in the story of Jesus. Herod's ethnic background was Arab on both sides of his family, and he was raised a Jew. Herod rose to power largely through his father's good relations with the Roman general and dictator Julius Caesar, who entrusted Herod's father Antipater with public affairs of Judah. Herod was appointed provincial governor of Galilee in 47 BCE, and when Herod was about 26 years old. There he faithfully farmed the taxes of the region for the Roman Senate. In 40 BCE in Rome, Herod was unexpectedly appointed king of the Jews by the Roman Senate, but that required him to kick the current Roman ruler out of the office. What I'm learning about the Roman Empire is it was really whoever could control anything was the one who controlled stuff. So there was always intrigue and upset in the Roman Empire. Herod eventually prevailed and became the sole ruler of Judea and the title of King of the Jews for himself, ushering in what is known as the Herodian dynasty. Calling Herod a king is a bit of a misnomer. He was a client king, which means he was a person in charge of a particular territory under Roman rule. For all intents and purposes, he was basically a king only of the people that he ruled. Herod was not known as a great leader. He got that nickname because he undertook some colossal building projects. One, for example, is the Temple and the Temple Mount. Now, this is obviously not a real picture of the Temple and the Temple Mount because it was destroyed in the year 70 CE. This is in that model of the city that exists there at the Museum of Israel. And it's a 1/50th scale, so imagine it 50 times, well, you can't tell how big I would be standing next to it, so I guess that doesn't really matter. But anyway, that's what it looked like when Herod spent all this time and money on it. Around 19 BCE, he began a massive expansion project of the Temple Mount. Solomon's temple was built in about 1000 BCE, and it was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. The Babylonians were defeated by the Persians, and they were allowed to come back to Israel. Well, it wasn't called Israel then, it was called Canaan. And, they were allowed, Cyrus of Persia allowed them to rebuild their temple, in fact, gave them some resources to build it with. So, it was then completed in 515 BCE, and this was the temple that King Herod enlarged in 37 BCE, along with doubling the size of the Temple Mount. Now, this is the western wall at sunset. I took this picture on a night when I was up on an observation deck, and that is exactly what it looked like that night. That's the Dome of the Rock in the background, and this is a minaret. And at sundown, the imam starts singing there. If you want to hear him, I got him on my phone. Today, this wall is known as the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall, and it formed a part of the retaining wall, most notably the Western Wall of the Temple Mount. By the way, let me think now for a minute. This direction here, I believe, is north. So this is not the Wailing Wall, though. So it would be this side. It's a part of this. It's not the whole thing, obviously. It's really rather small. See? It goes. And then I have another picture from an observation deck. That's as big as it is. And this is the Temple Mount back here. In Herod's day, there were no plants up there. This thing here is the Palestinian entrance to the Temple Mount. You have to go through security over here to get up there. And you have to go through security over here to get on this surface at all. This thing right here, there's a gate, there's a wall here, and a wall here. It's just kind of like a divider. This is the women's section. This is the men's section. And when I was there, I got pictures of this because it's really amusing, and I'll show it to you later. Not tonight. But the women, they pull their chairs up here so that they can stand up and watch over the wall of what the men are doing. Because they're very demonstrative, you know, when they're praying. All right. Okay, CAESAREA MARITIMA, I mentioned that. That's also on the Mediterranean, as you can see. This is a drawing of what it would have looked like in Herod's day. And I'll explain to you what it is. Herod took a small fishing village on the Mediterranean coast and enlarged it, established an inland harbor that was safe for shipping, and decided the town and its port, and dedicated its town and its port to Caesar Augustus, naming it Caesarea Maritima. In 22 BCE, Herod began construction of this deep water harbor, built storerooms, markets, wide roads, baths, temples to Rome and Augustus, and imposing public buildings. This is a hippodrome. And that's where they would have chariot races and gladiator fights, and later on would allow the Christians to wrestle the bears and the lions. This is an amphitheater for shows. This is Herod's palace. And this is Herod's freshwater pool. The rest of it is houses and shops and so on. This is how it looks today. It's kind of beat down. As you can see, there's no building here on Herod's platform. This is all, the center here is all gone. There are no stadium seats around this anymore. In fact, you can see the water has eroded clear up into here. This, however, still sits there. This is a real picture, and this is the what's left of the theater, and they still have shows there in the summer. That is Herod's palace, and this is the hippodrome, and the deep water harbor is up there. So the hippodrome regularly featured chariot races and gladiator fights, and in 12 BC, the Olympics. Later in the apostolic era, it was where Christians were fed to the lions and bears for the entertainment of the Roman residents. The theater that is still in use today overlooking the Mediterranean. And of course, you're going to want to know, how in the world did Herod have a freshwater pool at his palace? And how did all these people get fresh water? Aren't you wondering that?
Yeah.
Well, look at that. I have another picture of the amphitheater there. Well, this is called the aqueduct. And the aqueduct was built from a spring at the base of Mount Carmel, 5 miles away. This thing is gigantic. You can drive a car through any one of those, and it's probably 30 feet high, and on the top of this was just a channel. And water ran all the way from Mount Carmel, way back here, 5 miles to the east, all the way to the coast. Herod's zeal for building transformed Judea. and his motives were not selfless. He also built fortresses that he could run to easily in the case of any part of his kingdom being under attack. Now, last week, I think I showed you this very picture. This is the ruins of Masada. Now, this is down by the Dead Sea. In fact, that is the Dead Sea back there. And I failed to point out, this is the ramp that the Romans built that took them 3 years to build, 1 bushel basket of rocks and dirt at a time. For 3 years, the Romans built this ramp so that they could breach Masada. And once they breached Masada, what did they find? Everybody was dead. There are, this is Herodium, another place, a palace and fortress that Herod built and named it after himself. It was built between 23 and 15 BCE, and it's the site of Herod's tomb. This is where he wanted to be buried. Now, I didn't go to any of these 4 places, but I'm going to tell you about them. They're all ruins, so there's, it's a pile of rocks. But I'm going to tell you what's significant about it. In Alexandrium, it was a restored village by Herod the Great. Herod gave it the character of a palatial desert fortress. Herod used the fortress as a prison for his political opponents, holding his second wife, Mariamne, and her mother, Alexandria, there in 30 BCE. What a guy. He built a prison just for his beloved wife and her mother. It was also the burial site of Alexander, a son of Herod, and Aristobulus, 2 of his sons, whom Herod had executed. Why? Because they might have usurped his authority and executed him. That's why. That's how things worked. Hyrcania, built by the Hasmonean Empire before, was used in an uprising against Herod the Great, led by the sister of Herod's executed former rival Antigonus. The fortress was retaken and extended and became notorious as a place where Herod imprisoned and killed his enemies, ultimately including his own son and heir, Antipater. So there's another descendant off with his head. Macarius, rebuilt by Herod the Great in 30 BC, was used as a military base to safeguard his territories east of the Jordan. Upon the death of Herod the Great, the fortress was passed on to his son Herod Antipas, who ruled from 4 BC to 39 AD. This is the one that comes into play at the end of Jesus' life. It was during that time that John the Baptist was imprisoned and beheaded at Macarius. In Hebron, I did not see this either, but in Hebron, which is not far from 19 miles south of Jerusalem, is this giant building. According to Abrahamic culture and religion, the cave and adjoining fields were purchased by Abraham as a burial plot. Over the cave stands a large rectangular enclosure dating from the Herodian era. Herod beautified the large Palestine area during his 33-year reign. He spent lavish funds to build for his people temples, aqueducts, cities, and for himself palaces and fortresses. Herod the Great appears in the Gospel of Matthew, which describes an event that we call the slaughter of the innocents. According to that account, the birth of Jesus was seen in the stars by the Magi, who visited Herod to inquire where the King of the Jews was to be born. What was Herod's title? King of the Jews. So they wanted to pay him homage, and Herod, the King of the Jews, was alarmed at the prospect of a usurper. And Herod assembled the chief priests and the scribes and the people and asked them where the anointed one was to be born. And they answered, Bethlehem, citing Micah 5:2. So Herod sent the Magi to Bethlehem, instructing them to bring back news when they had found him, so that he too could worship the little boy. Well, then the Magi had a dream that they should return another direction A similar dream was had by Joseph, and so he went to Egypt, and that foiled the plan. So, what did Herod do? Realizing he'd been outwitted, he ordered the killing of all boys of the age of 2 and under in Bethlehem and its vicinity. Now, theologians, scholars, and historians argue about how many boys under 2 would have been in Bethlehem in those days. Bethlehem is not a big city today, so who knows? All right. Oh, there's Herod and the 3 wise guys and his historians telling them where they should go. All right. Helena, mother of Constantine I. Accounts vary, but Helena was likely a common law wife of Constantius, who would eventually become a Roman emperor. But before that, around 272 CE, Helena gave birth to the future emperor Constantine I. However, Constantius needed a wife more consistent with his rising status. And so Constantius divorced Helena sometime before 289 CE. Helena never remarried and lived for a time in obscurity, though close to her only son, who had a deep regard and affection for his mother. Constantine grew in stature in his own, and when his father died in 306 CE, Constantine was proclaimed emperor of the Roman Empire. Following his elevation, his mother was brought back to the public life in 312, returning to the imperial court. Constantine appointed his mother Helena as Augusta Imperatrix and gave her unlimited access to the imperial treasury in order to locate relics of the Christian tradition. Now, I told you last week that Constantine did not become a Christian that anyone knows of, and he didn't make Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. He made it legal to be a Christian. It was a later emperor who made it the state religion. So in AD 326 to 28, Helena undertook a trip to Palestine, and she was responsible for the construction or beautification of 2 churches. The first one is the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. This is obviously a picture I took from Google Images because it's never like this there. This little thing here is called the Door of Humility. Us. And that's where you have to go in. It's not as tall as a person. It's about 4.5 feet tall. Now, I may have, obviously, that's the only picture I put in here of this because I'm going to cover it in greater detail next week, and I don't want to spoil the fun for you.
Oh, jeez.
I'm thinking how to pronounce that word. Elona. Elonia. Something like that. Eliona. There, I think I got it right. Ozzy, are you shaking your head? You know this.
Yeah.
Oh. Should have you stand right beside me. This church is on the Mount of Olives, and it's also known as the Church of Pater Noster, which is Latin for the Lord's Prayer. These tablets here have the Lord's Prayer written in languages from all over the world. All right, so this church is on the Mount of Olives, and it is allegedly the site where Jesus taught his disciples the Lord's Prayer. So that's part of this. Eliona means olives. So it's on the Mount of Olives. This is the chapel of the Ascension, and it is a chapel and shrine on the Mount of Olives near that last church, not far from the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's located on a site traditionally believed to be the earthly spot where Jesus ascended into heaven after his resurrection. And inside it there is a slab of stone believed to contain one of Jesus' footprints, because wherever he stepped on stones, it left an imprint. I will show you this in the 5th week. I have pictures inside a very small chapel, and inside it is this rock, and that's about it. You can see these walls around it a little bit. It used to be a much larger church, and then, the fire and earthquake and Islam, and then the Crusaders, and one thing after another. This is what's left today. Okay, probably the most famous building in all of Jerusalem is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Believe it or not, it's cruciform. You can't tell from that picture, but it is cruciform, meaning that it's in the shape of a cross. In the 130s, a Roman emperor built a temple to Venus over the supposed site of Jesus' tomb near Calvary. He did it on purpose. It was not yet the state religion, obviously, at 130 CE. But he did it on purpose because the Romans were pagans. And so he built a temple to Venus over the spot that he was told where Jesus was entombed. According to tradition, Helena ordered that temple be torn down, and according to that legend that arose at the end of the 4th century, chose a site to begin excavating, which led to the discovery of 3 crosses. Helena had a woman who was near death brought from the city. When the woman touched the first and the second crosses, her condition did not change. But when she touched the 3rd and final cross, she suddenly recovered. And Helena declared the cross with which the woman had been touched to be the true cross. The story Ezra told me was that there was a well at this site, and the 3 crosses were thrown down into this well just to get rid of them. And when they excavated the site, they found the 3 crosses, and then the rest of the story is as I just told it. On the site of discovery, Constantine ordered the building of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There, Helena also found the nails of the crucifixion. To use their miraculous power to aid her son, Helena allegedly had one placed in Constantine's helmet and another in the bridle of his horse. According to one tradition, Helena also acquired the holy tunic on her trip to Jerusalem, and it's in a shrine in Italy somewhere, and you can go see it. It's not the Shroud of Turin. This is a tunic that he wore before he was crucified. If you go inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there are side altars everywhere, and there are people everywhere. The last 4 stations of the cross are inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This, however, is the chapel of St. Helen. And there was a church service going on while I was there, so I took this picture at a later opportunity. This mosaic here is over 1,000 years old. Directly out this way, so that's the high altar on the back. Looking directly out this way is the tomb. Does that look like what you pictured it would be? Nope. That is not what any of us expect. So it's in this big round room, and this building has been built over an outcropping of rocks, and inside it there is a tomb. And so over the years, they've excavated Golgotha down to nothing, except for they have enshrined the place that holds the tomb. So you wait in line for hours, and then you get your couple of seconds to go in there. They send you in like 3 at a time. I'll explain a tomb to you in week 5, what they were like. And they always had a little seating area, a little bench. And then there was another cavity where the bodies would be laid. Tombs in the 1st century were not intended to be the final resting place. You were there for about a year until nature had done its thing, and then your survivors would go in and collect your bones and put them in an ossuary, which is a little box, and then you'd go to the family plot. This is the true cross. I expected it to be much bigger than that. But the story goes that this is not the true cross. This is a monstrance that held the true cross, and the true cross got lost somehow. But the monstrance now becomes an item of devotion, and it's kept by the bishop in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre somewhere, but it's not on display. I looked it up because I wanted to hear about the true cross. Okay. When you go out the main door of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and turn around and look up, so the door is over here. It's big. It's a monstrous door. There is a ladder on that building. There are several religious communities that fight for control over all the religious sites in all of Israel. So this is one of those situations. The so-called immovable ladder under the window of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, made of Lebanon cedar wood. How anybody knows that, I don't know. Sometime in the first half of the 18th century, someone placed the ladder up against the wall of the church. No one's sure who it was, or more importantly, to which sect of Christianity it belonged. The exact date when the ladder was placed is not known, but the first evidence of it comes from a 1728 engraving. 1728. Later in the 18th century, an understanding among the religious communities with respect to 9 shared religious sites in Jerusalem and Bethlehem was developed. The agreement is literally called status quo. Google it. Status quo states that no change could be made without the consensus of all of the Christian communities. Do you think they could ever agree on taking the stupid ladder down? So the ladder remains there to this day. No one dares touch it lest they disturb the status quo and provoke the wrath of others. Amazing. So then next week we are going to discuss the ministry of Jesus from Bethlehem, his birthplace, to Jerusalem, where he met his triumphant end. And I forgot to begin with a song. And so we are going to sing verse 1 and 2, and that's it. It's on the back of your placement. They love it. Actually, there are very few Jews that live in Jerusalem. It's like 80% Palestinian and 16% Jewish and about maybe 1.6% Christian. There's only, I think, 1,600 Christians in all of Jerusalem, maybe in all of Israel. I don't remember the statistic. But if you add up the Christian sites, and every one of them's got, 10 monks or priests or nuns in it, there's where you get the number. We have a Lutheran church right there in Jerusalem, and next week I will show you a picture of their pastor along with the other 6 Lutherans that went on this pilgrimage. Give me another question.
What sites were you most moved by?
Ask me at the end of the film, because that would be. Okay, so that, as I said, Mount Carmel was like it was on the first day, first full day. And I was kind of like, yeah, blah, 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 Elijah. He was around like at 1000 BCE. And I'm standing on the spot where he was. That makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Probably doesn't yours because you weren't there, but I was. And I was surprised by that reaction. Then with, CAESAREA MARITIMA, no one knows that Jesus was ever there, and so I'm kind of, again, like, well, a great bunch of piled up rocks. So what? It's more than 2,000 years old, and they still sit in that amphitheater and watch shows in the summer. It's amazing. Some of those structures that Herod built make Israel what it is today, because they still are standing, and people are still paying to go see it. And it's amazing, and that's why I wanted you to see that stuff, because Israel has been a significant place on the crossroads of civilization forever, for 7,000 years. So it's really quite an incredible place to go.
What kind of vehicle you guys move to place to place?
Just a big old tour bus, but I mean, just like you see around here.
Is it 10, 20 passengers?
Well, there were 33 of us in it, and not all of us had 2 in a seat, so it probably carried 50 people on it. Very comfortable, although we were kind of shoulder to shoulder if we were sitting with someone, and by the end of the time I had COVID, so. Yes, sir.
You got it.
Language they spoke and you were able to communicate with people.
Everybody there speaks English if they want to. Sometimes they don't want to. Arabic and Hebrew are the state languages. But, Hebrew is a recovered language until the early 20th century. There was no Israel, and it was, it came into being after the First World War and then became a country in 1948. And to cement their identity, they recovered the Hebrew language. It had been lost. Nobody spoke it. And that's because of all the ruling parties that came along and said, thou shalt be Persian. What do they speak in Persia?
Farsi.
Farsi. Thou shalt speak Farsi. And then, one of the Romans would come along and they'd say, well, you got to speak Greek. Yes.
Language Israel in the country.
Yeah, Hebrew or Arabic. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They would like you to speak, well, they wouldn't like me. I mean, the Israelis would like you to speak Hebrew. However, do you remember in the first week, on this placemat, you see this section here called the West Bank, and this section called Gaza. Those are Palestinian-controlled areas. They're the people that speak Arabic. And the rest of this skinny land here, there's nobody down here. I mean, there's nothing down here. So this is what's Israel, and that's where most of the Jews live, and those would be the people that speak Hebrew. By the way, the current prime minister Netanyahu.
Yeah.
He lives on the road out to CAESAREA MARITIMA. And we drove by his house and, yeah, of course we did. We're nice people. And our guide told us that's where he lived. But it's not a very big country, so he could get there to Jerusalem, which is now the capital city, in probably, 40 minutes. No big deal. Okay, well that's it for tonight. I sure appreciate your attention. Please come back next week because it's only going to get better from here. I promise you, Jesus will show up next week.
Next week.